golf was my life, and I didn't want to give it up. So I went to work.
And remember the name, for at just 9 years of age, Rory McIlroy from Hollywood is following in the steps of his golfing hero, Tiger Woods.
Oh my goodness! In your life have you seen anything like that?
And hello, golfers, and welcome to another episode of Making a Club Champion. And on this episode, we have a gentleman called Gary Smith. And I think you'll be able to tell pretty quickly that I was incredibly nervous interviewing Gary. And the reason for that, well, let me just break down a little bit of Gary's experience and what he's done. Gary has over 14 years' experience with working England's top amateur stars as the EGU technical coach. You may have heard of a couple of these names which went on to achieve European Tour success and even major wins. Danny Willett, Justin Rose, Chris Wood, Ross Fisher, Ollie Fisher, Richard Finch, David Horsey, Seve Benson, Nick Dottery, Gary Wilsonholme. So Gary, in terms of coaching, he's the man to go to if you're looking for, I would say, short game lessons. And I say that because I was lucky enough to have lessons at the age of 13, 14 off him myself, which pretty much carried the entire fundamentals of my game, which took me to America. And I was never the longest hitter when I got to the States, but I still managed to keep up with some of the college kids simply because I could still remember Gary's teachings 13 years later. The anchoring, the routines, the tips, the ball position, it was all very much Gary's tips I was implementing 13 years later. I could almost hear his voice. And, you know, he's so enthusiastic about the short game. And there's not a better person who I know who teaches it better. And even if you're outside of the UK, it would be like a Butch Harmon experience. You know, it'd be worth the flight. Gary also knows what it takes to play on tour. He won the Kenyon Open, which I didn't realise, and he played in 3 Open Championships. So during this episode, we really try and dig in on these routines, which include some like crazy challenges, which Gary Smith, you know, he makes the players do push-ups if they don't execute on some certain shots. So it's filled of lots of great little gems, actionable goodies for you to try and implement in your game. Gary is part of the top 25 coaches of Golf Monthly as well, and he does most of his coaching at Sutton Green and Guildford, Surrey. So take a good dive in, lots of valuable insights, and enjoy. Gary Smith, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Nice to be here.
So Gary, we first met when I was probably 13, 14. You were in charge of Gloucestershire County Golf Union, and still to this day, that must be 13 years later, every time I hit a short game shot, a chip out of the rough, your words, I can still hear your tone in your voice speaking to me on very specific little tips, little anchors, drop the hands. And I have, you know, I think like most amateurs, we work our way through coaches, and your methods seem to stick or have stuck with me for the longest out of anyone. So I'm just wondering, in terms of how you communicate your method, your lessons, I was wondering sort of the process of how you do that and what makes it so effective.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, I suppose you can understand most people who come to me for short game, and I coach a bit more short game than long game, even though long game's still very much at the fore for a lot of people. But you know, at the end of the day, they come to me on short game because they're in a pretty bad way normally, and they've tried maybe other coaches or they're exasperated. They just can't seem to make headway. So to me, it's a great sort of medium to be involved in, and I've been heavily involved in it for sort of 10 or 15 years now. And it's a logical thing. You've got to look at the logic of short game and get people to understand the simplicity and the repetitive sort of technique that I use, which is based on a survey I did a couple of years ago now. It's over 98% successful in my students. So, I know what works, and why change something that is tried and tested and very logical, pretty simple to get and to understand. I guess my technique hasn't changed. The coaching method hasn't changed since those many years ago that you and I worked with Gloucester.
Interesting. What was the survey you did?
I did a survey. I asked about 90 of my students. It was a blind survey, so they didn't have to give their name. They could basically say what they wanted. And I asked some pretty simple questions. Has your short game improved? A yes or no. By how much? Was it 10, 20 or 30%, etc.? And has your handicap come down? And I had 92 replies, and only one person said that it hadn't got better. And he was someone from abroad who I actually don't remember coaching. So that was a strange one, but I'm kind of interested to know why it didn't improve, because everyone should really.
So that was a sort of a survey on the sort of method you teach.
Yeah, exactly. It was I call it the linear method for short game, because you're talking about straight lines and you're talking about good simple right angles, and to allow the club to work as it wants to, and it's best to work it. And yet most people, they have their hands forward and the ball back and they stand a bit open, and that's still very much prevalent. But it makes short game so much more difficult, and you've got to be so much more skillful to play that way. So, the technique I use, I know works, and I know I get messages on a regular basis, pretty well every day, that from people who say, thanks, and it's great, I'm enjoying it, and that's the quickest way to bring your scores and handicap down, anywhere within 80, 100 yards. I think everyone knows that now.
So I remember distinctively what you just said about our first lesson together. So I stood over it like sort of like, I don't know, like how Tiger Woods would chip over it. He would,
keep when he was the feet left. Great, I guess that would make sense. Yeah,
keep the feet left, open it up, and and then you sort of try and hit a shot that's nothing like his. So I was wondering if you could walk us through the process, say like of I'm the average club handicap. I'm 15.
Okay.
I come to you on a lesson. What are you looking? What are you looking at in particular? And what would be the process you would put, say, me through to sort of get back to that sort of linear method? What are we looking at?
Well, I would start every session and I'd try and get my students to probably sign up to a couple of hours, because I can understand the difficulty they've gone through. And, everyone who struggles with any part of the game, but especially short game, just tries to try and create more and more control over the golf club and more manipulation over the golf club and the ball. And, of course, the best players do the opposite. So once you get people to understand the reasons why holding the golf club down the grip is a problem, because it reduces the energy of the golf club. The lower you hold it down, the worse the posture is, the more you're going to bail out of the shot, the less speed you create with the narrow arc, so you have to hit it harder, and therefore you lose control. Because of that, a hard or fast hit with a heavy club like a wedge is pretty disastrous. So once you try and build in and you video them and show them where they were and where they are. And I'm fortunate that I can demonstrate, pretty successfully. Then you kind of get them to buy into, the differences between what they do and what they can do. And to me, any lesson, anyone who goes to coaching, it's all to do with the attitude to change. And someone says to me, and I fully understand it, that, oh, this feels strange, this is weird, this a little bit off the wall and crazy. Well, relative to what they did, yeah, I guess so. But I would say what they did was crazy. And what this is just simply logical. And, you're aiming for a target. And why not aim and hit your golf ball to your target rather than aim somewhere left and play the ball in some weird place and, do these crazy things which we've been told to do for years and years. So it would be watch the player, understand what they do, and then proceed in a disciplined and process way, which I know works, and I'm happy to talk to you about that if that helps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we would start straightening the golfer up. So you have sort of, I'd imagine something like train tracks.
Yeah, a little bit, absolutely. You'd look at, why aim left? I mean, I've given probably 150 odd seminars all around Europe on short game to golf pros and coaches. And I've done it for many years for the PGA, and no one has yet really told me why there's an advantage in standing open and having your hands forward and, having the ball back. Because my kind of idea is I want to do the same thing every time. I want to aim straight. I want to deliver the club correctly, every time, which is achievable. But if I stand open, I want to know how open you're standing, because you're going to stand different, amounts of left if you stand open on any shot. Well, that's not acceptable to me. And if you have the ball back in the stance, where back is it? Relative to what? Relative to your feet, where your feet are not square. So, that's an unusual thing. If you have your hands forward, what loft actually are you using on the golf club? I want to know precisely what loft I've got, and because I want to aim the golf club and the golf ball arrow straight to my target. And I can't do any of those things if my setup is variable and, changes on almost shot by shot.
Okay. So say if we were given, say, a 15-yard shot, a pitch shot, what are sort of the Lego blocks / or the process that we would start to put in place to hit a shot like that?
Right. I first of all get my pole. I'd use 4 or 5 poles. I'd get my pole to set up the feet angle and do a 90-degree angle to give the ball position relative to a square stance. Now, the toe angle is important, where the toes are. I wouldn't want to fan the toes sort of towards the target. I'd want a neutral set up position with both toes slightly out, maybe the left toe more turned out than the right. I'd put the ball with every shot I play around the green left heel. Doesn't vary.
So every club, whatever shot, bunkers, pitches, chips, because people don't appreciate that, ball position should not be relevant to the feet. Ball position should be relevant to the sternum, because the sternum largely denotes the bottom of the arc of the golf club. And if I get my sternum on the golf ball, that gives me every chance of the club bottoming out in the right place. And if I play the ball left heel, it allows me to release the golf ball to the target rather than further back in the stance. I'm stuck and I can't let the club go to the target. It becomes less target focused. So if you had, if you're always keeping the ball in the same position, I'm guessing to hit the very different shots, you were just changing the loft on the club.
That's, why not? I mean, let's change the loft of the golf club. Let's change the speed of the action. So it's a bit like serve, like tennis. You can second serve softer, or I liken it to music. You can hit quiet shots if you need to be hitting a soft shot, maybe downwind, down grain, or you can go to a faster spinny shot, by using more energy and more speed up to a point where you're still in control of your body and your club. So to me, you become much more of an artistic player potentially by understanding what each shot demands. But to me, each shot you play the same, because I don't want to have a variance in what I do or my students do.
And you would you would use the loft and the sort of, I guess, the bigger muscles of the body to provide the control or flight or...
Yeah, and the speed. Yeah, I mean, body rotation, if you stand square and you turn your body and you get your tummy and your chest to match your arms, I always talk about the midsection, the tummy and the chest is basically the engine of the shot, and the arms go along for the ride. So they work with the body. But of course, if you're standing open, the body action is going to go left, and I don't want the ball to go left. So that's where it's a bit of a confusion and contradiction for me. So I stand pretty square. I may even get some of my players to stand slightly closed because it aids rotation of backswing, and it encourages the person to turn through the shot more positively and release the club head and the right hand even more, aggressively if need be. So my best players quite often stand closed in bunkers and square or closed on pitching. And it works brilliantly. And yet you don't read about that very often in magazines. But I know for a fact that it works, great. But if you want to talk about the processes, I always work to 4 stations. Station 1 would be no target. So I'd get the player just to build in the technical changes. and that could take some time, whatever. Station 2 is no target and different distances, different clubs. Station 3 becomes target eventually, then you pressurize yourself a little bit, and Station 4 would be target with consequences, maybe playing a competition or writing down some really important facts. So there is a bit of tension, and I want to see how the players react and vary from Station 1 to Station 4.
And I'm guessing that could almost take months.
It could take weeks. I've known some of my players that stay in Station 1 all week because they love it. They just love the strike, they love the flight, and the consistency, and gradually you move them into a more pressurized situation. Yeah, that works really well for me.
Yeah, so I'm guessing is this sort of there's like a phase of learning, then it's like implementing.
You got it.
And then you're performing, and then the obviously you're under the competitive pressure.
Yeah, competitive, and you go from no pressure where the player really shouldn't react overly good or bad shots. This is a technical station, and we're building in changes. And if the attitude to change is fresh and it's confident, if you like. I mean, confident probably isn't the right word, but if it's a positive attitude to change, then I can do anything. I mean, I can bring in great changes very, very quickly. If it's questionable changes and it's reacting to feelings, then it takes longer. But that's the only barrier to me. And then let the player just eventually just go, because once they have the technique, they can come back for a maintenance thing, but a review, but they don't really need to be told the same thing, because once they get it, they've got it.
Yeah, we had Matt Wallace on the show last week. He won 6 tournaments on the Alps Tour last year.
Great.
And he was going through, he tell us a little story of how he wanted to change coach at one part of his journey because it felt right to him. And I guess that's, every coach has his own method. Everyone wants to sort of put their own sort of spin on their own style or their own teachings. So I'm guessing, a part of that has to be, a trust and relationship with you in what you're going to bring to the table for them. Yeah,
sure. And the one thing I do know in all the years I've been coaching now, which is pretty considerable, is that no coach owns any player. They're not our property. So there's no ownership thing. And hey, I would encourage my players to go to other coaches if I felt they could give them better advice in various aspects of the game, whether it be putting or driving or whatever. If I don't have all the answers, and I do not have all the answers, and no coach does, then you've got to allow, especially your better players, to go and get advice. And hey, it's a circular thing. It goes round and round quite often. I've had players come back to me 2 or 3 times. I mean, tour pros, successful players that have come back, having tried other coaches, and that's fine, because they should be eager to learn and to inquire from so-called experienced quality coaches. And I can only admire that approach for always wanting to learn. Having said that, if the advice is right and it's backed up with sensible explanation, then you've got to work hard basically and work clever.
Yeah, the back to the your stages of how you work, the processes of how you work through that. So if I'm I get a lesson, on the short game, and I'm learning this new technique, this unnew, all the muscle memory group feels terribly wrong, and I'm just going through the battles of the ball going everywhere. Basically, how long does that journey bit take for just to keep, should I drop it, or should I just keep battling on and keep grinding away? I always remember there was a story with Oliver Fisher at the Faudo series one year. This is way back, and he said, I've got to get a lot worse to get a lot better. Yeah.
I don't quite get that, I have to say. I understand that that's been said for quite some time from players. To me, getting worse is all about not taking on the changes and in the right attitude. If you take on the changes with the right approach, this is me, this is what I want. Where I am is not where I want to be. I don't want to go back there. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to bust a gut, and I'm not going to overreact on good or bad shots. If I hit 3 bad shots in a row, I want to know what they are, but I'm not going to overreact. If I hit 3 perlers, it just gives me an insight into what's potential, but no more than that. So if you can get players to have that approach of wanting and excited about the opportunity, but realistic, then they can get this, the same day. I mean, I had a player last week who was in all sorts of trouble. He's a 4 handicapper, and they openly admits, and as most of them do, he could come down to near scratch with a good short game. So it's important. It's really important to a lot of these people, and it can make a huge difference, And all I will say is, if you drive it 20 yards further, you're not going to reduce your score by 4 shots, but a good short game, you definitely can. So if the attitude is good and the player understands, and I explain it and maybe demonstrate it, and he can see pretty quickly what he needs to do and what he can do, then he can run with it. And this player last week got it the same day. He got it within 2 hours and said to me, he went back to his club and worked on it afterwards, and it was like, wow, this is fun. And it's got to be fun, You want these people not to be grimacing all the time about short game. You want them to smile about it.
Is it the early win, or is it the feeling so that the golfer can take home that learning and sort of work on himself, because he's got to get it right. He's got to get
it, but he's got to getting it. What is getting it to me means he's got to understand the different quality of the strike. He's got to understand that he doesn't have to be precise in his entry point into the ground, because a shallow attack means you can hit 2 inches behind the ball, maybe even more if the ground conditions are right, and you can hit a perfectly serviceable pitch, chip, or whatever, and it should go pretty arrow straight. So my best players work on between 3 and 5% of the distance they're landing the ball. So if they want to land it 50 yards, then 5% would be 2.5 yards. 10% is 5, 5% is 2.5. If they're working on 3%, that's about 1.5 to 2 yards either side of my target. That is the sort of accuracy the better players work towards. And it should go that straight. If you adhere to the processes and the technique, you really can't not hit the ball pretty straight. And as I say, your room for error, with the margin for error for where the club has to hit the ground, is very, very wide. So precision is not what it's about with my technique. You don't have to be precise. You just have to focus on certain criteria, and grip pressures are important, and how your body and your club is released to your target.
Yeah, I'm staring at a little diary from mine. It said 2nd of October 2004, and the first bullet point is soft hands.
Soft hands, yeah. I mean, I've moved on a little bit since then, where I say, soft hands. What does that mean? What I say now is the left hand is 1 out of 10 in grip pressure, and the right hand is 2 out of 10. So I put a number on it. And I get players to start at 10 and work down towards 0, and they can realize actually what 1 and 2 is. And it's a lot lighter than probably they're aware of. So,
actually, I'll go through these. Actually, it'd be interesting. So, the second one I've got is chase after the ball, lean into the shot, chase the ball into the hole. I always remember it was. It's not the feeling of stopping the club at the ball on impact. It's following through the butt of the club in the belly button all the way to the hole and holding the shot.
Yeah, again, I look at tennis, I look at cricket, I look at darts, I look at pretty any sport where there's physicality and there's momentum, of whether it's a racket or a cricket bat or whatever it may be, or even darts, and the best ones don't stop. I mean, they keep moving. The momentum takes them past their exit point where they're letting go of the cricket ball or the tennis racket or the tennis ball. And they keep moving, and they keep the whole routine going. And all they have to work on is the sequence of the motions and the sequence of the delivery of whatever it is you're delivering. And that's the same in the technique that I use. So you don't want to control anything. These guys, these best tennis players, are not in control of the racket head. The best cricketers are not in control of their arm and their golf ball. They just sequence the motions and work on their aiming and their run up or whatever it may be, or their grip of their tennis racket. Golf's short game, to me, is exactly the same.
The next one I've got is club selection. Is there a process of choosing a club? Because obviously you could play so many different types of shots with one club. Sure. So what are you really looking at when you're determining what shot to hit? Say if you're like on the fringe of a green, you could play a 7-iron, you could play an 8, you could play a pitching wedge, all the way to a lob wedge. What steps would you look at to determine what club to play on a given shot, whatever you would like?
Chris, ultimately, you want to be able to use all the clubs pretty well in your bag. I would say from 5-iron right up to your wedges, and even sometimes your rescue woods, that you can use this off the edge of the green. Because they're like a toolkit. I work with a coach called Graham Walker, who I massively respect, and he used to call all the clubs in the bag the toolkit, and it's exactly right. Toolkit means if I want to chip and run it, and my mantra is look at the lie. What can you do from that lie? Do you have to chip it, or can you lob it if you want to? Then make a decision on number one: can I pitch it on the green? Safely on the green. If I can't, then okay, I have to pitch it short. But if I can pitch it on the green, the lie allows me, then let's decide a golf club that I can pitch the ball safely on the green. And if you're on the edge of it, that normally means 4 or 5 feet. And then allow the ball to release to the hole if you've got a chip and run. The technique means you can use any golf club. And then with practice, you can just bring in simple routines. So can you land the ball on the green? If you can, do it. And don't make a big swing if you don't have to. They're pretty simple, fundamental rules. But again, as you become better at short game, you become more artistic in your approach, and you can even change the spin. You can spin it more if you want to. You can run it and release it a bit more than normal to remove or reduce certainly some of the spin. And then it becomes a real sort of artistic approach to how you see each shot. But the lies first. Number one, can you do anything with this lie? If so, can you pitch it on the green? If so, let's use a club that allows it to land safely and run to the hole. Simplicity is key, really.
Yeah. I was in Spain in October, November. I was caddying for a chap called Matt Perry at the final of the European Tour School. And he had a very similar process of how he would go through every shot. And it would always be, look at the lie, determine if that would, qualify for a fade or a draw. Then that would, determine the club selection. Then it would be then he would go onto the wind, and then it would be where the flag is situated on the green.
Yeah, absolutely spot on, really. You think, well, why doesn't everyone do that? Because that's the most obvious way. So if you're saying, I hit, one of the coaches in America who is really good, but I don't agree with this one thing. He says, you always use your 56 around the green all the time. Well, all I would say that if I've got a 6 or 7 iron chip and run shot and someone's going to use a 56 from varying lies, I'll play them for whatever money they've got any day of the week, because it's just too difficult. Let's use a technique at a golf club that actually makes it simpler.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually you could play, you could use any club you want to around a given shot, but obviously ultimately determines on the lie first, and everything sort of goes from there.
Absolutely. The lie's a tough lie. We were working with the player the other day on this sort of slightly muddy, if you like, spongy sort of lies. Well, you can't use the bounce particularly well, if at all, there. So it could be a back foot dig. It may be a back foot, lofted club that you de-loft and you have your hands forward and you have to kind of hit down quite steeply on it, but you don't have much control. But it could be the best option, and tour pros don't have those conditions very often, so you don't see them doing it very much, but it is an option.
Absolutely. This is something I actually still don't know today. What is bounce, and how can a player use bounce? And
I changed the word. I don't like to use bounce. I like the word slider, because bounce sort of means it is going to come in and ricochet off the ground. So, the bounce is the soul of the golf club, and you can see on the wedges, Vokey especially, but all wedges, Cleveland, and all these have numbers on, whether it be sort of 1, 2, 3 degrees, very little bounce, up to, you can get 20 plus degrees. And it's basically, once the shaft is vertical, it's the angle of the leading edge compared to the angle of the back of the sole. So there is an angle. If you put the club vertical down in front of you, you'll see the sole doesn't sit flat. And the more bounce you have, the more the club will basically, if your technique is right, it will not dig into the ground so much. So I like to use bounce on, or sliding on all of my wedges from probably 7, 8 degrees up to 15, 16 degrees. So, but it's all due with, there's no point in having a load of bounce. And Bob Vokey used to, and still does, talk about the bounce as your best friend. You should use it. But if your hands are 10 degrees forward and you've got an 8-degree bounce, you can't use it. It's not going to help you at all. So, having sensible technique with decent bounce means the game's much easier.
So I think sort of change the sort of direction of this. Like I noticed that you were also a tour player yourself.
Loosely.
Is this true that you won the Kenyon Open, free Open Championship appearances, amongst some others as well? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I can tell you when it was. It's in the 1970s, so it was some time ago. It was in the very early Seve days, and Sam Torrance, and a lot of these I would call great players at the time. But I was fortunate to win the Kenyon Open, which was great, and I finished runner-up the following year. To play in the Open 3 times was fun, and I played probably quite successfully for 5 or 10 years. But coaching to me is a joy, and and playing was never really a joy. It was always a tough demand, and physically I was never particularly strong, and that always was an issue for me. So I love coaching now, and I play very little because my competitive edge means I want to play well, and I'm well into my 60s, and it's not so easy now. So I can do what I like to do what I do well, and that means coaching.
How did you transform from the player to the coach, and then into I guess specializing in the short game?
Well, it's an interesting question. I had a phone call once because I was coaching Wayne Riley, and both Wayne and Richard Boxall, and they were getting great success. And Wayne had won 3 tournaments, including the Scottish Open, and Richard had won the Italian Open. So I was really enjoying their success. And of course, we all have our egos, us guys, and I was loving it. So I had a phone call saying, would I get involved in the England setup with England Golf Union? And I said, jumped at it. Yeah, absolutely. And I had 14 years working with the England elite squad. Your Danny Willets and Chris Woods, and all these guys are out there, and Tyrrell Hattons and Beef Johnson. They all came through our system, and to work with some fantastic coaches, just great. Dave Ridley and Graham Walker, and a lot of these guys. There were 3 of us coaches. Was a great joy and a learning curve, and to see these top players come through and see where they go now is just fantastic. So very fortunate to be asked to be involved in that, and very fortunate to have done it for so long. I look upon myself as a lucky guy.
Thoroughly deserved by just some of the players you mentioned. But that obviously all stimulated from a relationship with Wayne Riley, and
yeah, I guess so. I think that success definitely springboarded me towards being involved in the England setup.
How did you meet Wayne, and what was?
I was at Camberley Heath. That was my I was head pro there for 10 years, and they were Richard was always been a member there, so we got on great. We used to play a lot of golf with Richard, and Wayne and Richard knew each other from the tour. So I think Wayne used to live near Bagshot, and therefore used to come and play, and he eventually came and we hooked up, and he joined the club as well. So, we had the 3 of us used to do a lot of coaching. I used to coach them a lot, and a lot of playing, and used to play for a lot of money in those days, including Sam Torrance. So, they loved playing sort of competitively on a day-to-day basis. They didn't love practicing very much, but they loved playing, and that's okay, because you've got to learn, how to play. And they absolutely did learn how to play under pressure. We used to play for £50 impresses. This was 25 years ago. So it was serious stuff.
What's a press for people?
A press is you have a game. Maybe if I played with Wayne against Richard and Sam Torrance, it would be as soon as a team get 2 up, you start another game. So you go 2 flat, 2 up, and then flat means you start another game for £50. So
it was always beat to 2?
Yeah, well, if you go then for 4 up, and then you go 4-2, you go 4-2 flat. So you've got 3 games going, and it could get very expensive. So if you had 2 of us who weren't playing particularly well, you could go down heavily. So it did add spice, and you got your sort of your head down and focusing on sometimes damage limitation. So great for golf, though.
So you could have, 9 mini games within 18 holes if you're playing?
If it was 2 players playing brilliantly and the other 2 struggling, they could lose very, very heavily. I remember we had a game once and it was 7-5, 3-1, and about to have another game, I think. So
God.
Serious stuff in those days.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're Danny Willett, Justin Rose, Chris Wood, Ross Fisher, Ollie Fisher, Nick Doherty, all these guys you sort of you may have touched at some point. How do you look at a player like that who's really at the top of their game? And you're sort of
when they were with us, of course they weren't. They were sort of at 17, 18, 19. Maybe a bit older, some of them, but they were sort of getting into. They were still amateur golfers, but they were working towards quite clearly a professional career. So you have to be mindful that these guys are already good players. They already have their own coaches. So we used to focus on, the physical side with the physios and the fitness experts. And we used to obviously work on technique and give them a few more tools and on-course play. And it was a massive support system. I think that if you'd asked any of them, they all say now, it was helpful. And, we loved it. And it was a great camaraderie and great team spirit. And of course, they played for England in all the team matches. And it's a perfect start to anyone's potential career in professional golf.
How would someone go about sort of being selected for the England squad, or how, what does it sort of take to be amongst that sort of tribe?
Yeah. Well, A, handicap, B, sort of tournament and amateur sort of wins and successes. And the golf clubs, if you're a +3 or +4 player, you're going to be on the radar. There's no doubt about it. You can't be that kind of standard without being made aware, or the selectors being made aware of these players. So it's pretty self-evident that they would be selected. But if they didn't really adhere, or they didn't, sort of stack up in a team environment or in coaching days, or if there was dissent on whatever, attitude was wrong, then they could get dropped. So players were dropped occasionally, which is right and proper. But basically, they self-select almost because of their ability and their potential.
Would that be mainly sort of down to attitude, or just commitment to the program? And
yeah, we used to do fitness stuff, and we could generally tell. I mean, not always, but pretty well. Between the 3 of the coaches, we knew when a player was really working hard and earned the right to play well, and if a player was half-hearted towards it, or a little bit dismissive of what we were asking them to do. It doesn't mean to say they're going to be removed from the squad because of that, but they have to justify if they don't agree with what we're asking them to do. They have to come back and say why. And normally there isn't really a good answer for them to be asked them to be fitter or healthier, or play a bit more sensible, or even more aggressive on the golf course, whatever it may be.
Is so obviously you have like a highly tuned golfer who's sort of looking to go pro. I mean, how much more of when you get to sort of that scratch plus handicap, what are you really trying to sort of find out from the weeds? You're really trying to finely tune this sort of engine almost of what do you continue trying to, you just trying to maintain, or because these are very marginal improvements at this sort of level.
Yeah. If it varies from player to player clearly, but if you've got a player who is maybe scratch or +1 or something, and they maybe have just flatlined a bit and they're not progressing, the coach wants to know which area. I want to know as much about, the player's game as I possibly can. And this is where stats come in, trying to find out really important information about, what are the damaging shots? What are the facts tell me about your short game and your putting stats? And there's always an area somewhere that we can highlight. And this is why understanding your game through numbers is important. It's not everything, but a coach wants to know. Put it this way, Chris: if someone comes to me and says, I want to work with you, and I ask them, where's your game? Tell me about it. And they say, well, it's just not that good. I'm just not playing great. Well, that's no good to me. I need to know specifics. So if they're that good a player, they should have specifics about their game, which they flagged up. And then you can target that.
As you say, what kind of number, like what kind of data would I be giving you?
I'd want to know, the fairways you hit or miss, where do you miss them? I'd want to know what are the percentages. The greens hit, where do you hit or miss them? What's your distances on average over maybe 20 games? I'd want to know your up and down stats. I'd want to know even your practice stats. If you practice the way I like my players to practice, they'll come up with some information. So there's a game I call Aussie Rules, where if I'm doing, say, a 50-yard pitch, I'd have 4 posts, depending on the standard, 10% and 5% of the distance. So I'd have maybe 2 posts that are 5 yards apart, 10 yards, and another 2 posts inside that are 2.5 yards apart. And I would ask them to hit right into the center of that. And I want to record data as to where they're missing. Are they missing left or right? How far left? How far right? What's their distances as well. So we do that on a regular basis to just get information about how good people are. And the same on distance control. So I work on distance control with a player. I was in Manchester last week working with a young player, super little lad. He's, for his age, he's number one in Europe. And he's, I've been working with him for 6 months, and I've got all year to work with him. And we would do a distance control test over 10 shots. And his averages last time in Manchester last week were 2.1%. That means on average, he's 2.1 yards. He's like 6 or 7 feet on average over 10 shots off his perfect distances. If I call out 56, he's basically 56 yards. He's hitting it about 58. Or it could be long or short, but that's a fantastic distance control, number, which is great. So that isn't an area you need to work on with him. You just maintain it. But that kind of information for me and any coach is massively important.
So 2 questions on that. So if someone was going to implement something like that, the feedback on, say, the yardages, what drill could they do? And I'll send you the other question now in case I forget, does any players use like a certain software or, on their statistics? Do they just keep it in a notebook? How do they record all of that information? Yeah.
Well, I think something like Golf Data Lab, it's always been a very good software system you can download and join. Golf Shot is a simple one, but it works great for the player that doesn't need so much, really sort of intricate information. That kind of sort of stuff, I think, really, really helps a player. And again, if you're looking at tools for these players to practice on, I've got about 50 skills tests, maybe more, that I would use in different areas of the game. And I suppose a player would benefit from sort of being involved in some of those, depending on their games. But you can, a lot of these clubs you can join now, these online clubs, will give you stats and skills tests that you can use. And they're not everything, but they're pretty good information. They kind of do tell you really where your game is. And if you do it with pressure, if you do it where some of the players that I work with, I set them a standard. If they don't achieve it, every shot above it, they've got to do 10 sit-ups or 10 squats or whatever it may be. And they don't want to do those.
You're building some pretty buff golfers.
I want to see what they're like under pressure. Because, a lot of them can do great when there's nothing on it. But I want to test them in real time if I can.
I don't know if I heard a story about that. Did you, like, Danny Willett was very good at this with the driver, apparently. He used to be able to have that, slot it between a rugby post with a driver every single time. That was a go-to shot he had. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, Danny was a great, great attitude. His attitude to the game was as good as anyone's, and he was hungry and he was keen and very, very keen to improve. And he listened to all the coaches. He was brilliant, and to see where he is now and moving on. Yeah, it's maybe a surprise he's won the Masters, but it's not surprised he's way up there in the world rankings. A bit like Chris Wood's exactly the same. Woody was a 7-day-a-week player and it suited him, and you admire that constant yearning to find the answers. And to me, that's what the game's all about.
So if you just took your average, say, 15 handicapper who came up to see you, and then you just compared it to what you've just described of like Chris Wood, a 7-day-a-week golfer.
Yeah, you can't compare. There's no point trying to compare, Chris. You got to, you got to deal with the player, their ability, their practice time, their access time, and their physicality, and all those things, and then coach accordingly. So, yeah, I don't think there's a lot of point in trying to compare. It's like swings for swings. No point trying to get someone.
No, absolutely. I think it was
swing.
The point I was trying to make was almost that Chris Wood is turning up 7 days a week, and probably the average club golfer is probably doing 1 to 2 times a week, and wondering why he may not be getting better week on week. So I guess there's an element of time, and then obviously trying to make that time as effective as possible.
For sure. Yeah, completely right. And you take Gary Wolstenholme, he was 230 caps for England. He was he's on the seniors tour now as a pro, but he was an amateur pretty well of his whole career up to the age of 50, which is unusual. He used to practice, he told me, an hour a day, no more. That was it, maximum an hour. But the hour he gave was totally focused and with a purpose. And that's fantastic. So it's not the amount of time you do, really. It's the quality of the time that you have and you apply to your practice. And I think that for an amateur golfer, that's really, really important.
I want to be appreciative of your time, Gary. But so I think I just want to, before we wrap up, I want to sort of dive into sort of, I guess, the practice bit. So just what you said on Gary Wolstenholme of, how could one become more effective at using their time? Because as with most golfers, they've got a job, they've got family. So if they're given, say, an hour a day or, an hour a week, maybe, what are we looking at? How are we spending that time? How are we breaking up? Are we spending it on the long game? What would a good practice session involve?
For me, I would never be able to generalize for all golfers. It's a bit like saying, can you give a tip, or whatever for everyone? No, not really. It's just not helpful because each player has their own individual, needs and concerns. But if they can understand their games a little bit and get the basic understandings of where they tend to hit the ball, where they tend to miss it, understand their strengths and weaknesses, whether you score each element of your game out of 10 or whatever, or 20, so you can see, where your weaknesses are. And then if it's an hour, 2 or 3 times a week, literally split it into technical improvement. If you're having coaching, you'll be given advice on that, and then apply it under some pressure. So you bounce from, I'm working on my motions and what I've been told that's going to improve this weak area, and then I'm going to test it, maybe for 20, 30 balls, and I'm going to go back and work on it again. And then over an hour, you'll start to see very quick, pretty definite improvements in the area you're working on. So long as physically you can do it, as long as your advice is sound, which is where I think it's important. You've got a coach that has experience and has worked, to a decent level. And you may have to pay a bit extra for that, but I think it's well worth it.
So yeah, when I graduated university, I moved to San Francisco, and we worked in this. I worked in this incubator. It was like an idea lab. It was called Monkey Inferno, and we would build businesses up every 6 weeks. And the premise of that was that we would come up with like a hypothesis of the problem we were trying to solve, and then we would try and validate that problem a week later. And it's almost kind of fitting of what you are sort of saying there is like, you do the technical bit, you find the problem, and then you strip everything back, and then you actually try and validate that by like, a drill of like 10 balls at a given target, to sort of give you that feedback and validate your assumption if this is the thing you're working on.
Yeah, I for sure. These players, everyone, they've got to pretty soon see some advantage in what they're trying to do and the changes they're making. If they don't see it, we're not all Faldo that we can go 2 years until we get where we want to get. That's just not realistic. And I'm not sure that's fully true with him anyway. But players need to be able to see pretty quickly or feel it or understand that, where they were and where they are and where they can be is going in the right direction. And it shouldn't take ages if, again, I say the attitude to change is a healthy one and a realistic one. So, yeah, let's understand the information, the good and bad, and don't always go on bad. Understand what you're good at and enjoy that. But, let's deal with the issues and let's get some pretty quick if the approach is right. Pretty quick changes of improvement.
And like a term of success for you, or validating, what would that look like? Would it be?
Well, no, that's a hard one. That you kind of flagged up something that, what is success? I mean, it changes for everyone, and coming down 2 shots to a single figure is some people's dream come true. Other people are much more involved in a long-term process of improvement. It just changes from player to player. What I would look upon as success, another player may say, well, that's pretty ordinary. So, and vice versa. So that's a very hard one to quantify.
But I guess it's getting very clear on that and defining that.
Yeah.
So you can.
Yeah,
so
I think
can
a
work
good coach
towards.
can tell a player, where they can expect to be, what their potential is. I mean, allowing for physicalities and allowing for access to play and coaching. They can give a pretty decent idea about potential improvement.
Fantastic. I know. Just to wrap up, I think I know I've got some sort of just fire questions.
Okay.
Is there a most gifted book or a reading or that you encourage golfers that you recommend?
Yes, I would say there are a couple of books. One is a golf book called, well, it's not a golf book, actually. Let me quantify that. It's a book that's going to help golfers understand, how they think and how they work. But there are 2 books. One is The Bounce, which I've read a couple of times, and I think everyone would, certainly understand a lot about sport and why some people are successful and why others are not, especially for a younger player. It's a great book. Bounce. And the other one would be The Chimp Paradox, which again is it's a fascinating book because it tells you why you think as you think and why you react as you react. So I would recommend those 2 books, which are not specifically for golf, but they are, you can learn an awful lot in the game of golf from them. And the other book that I'm reading right now, which is not a golf book, is called Red Notice by Bill Bowder. Which is a great book about Russian the problems in Russia with corruption, etc. So I'm actually reading it twice now, the second time around. So there was a lot in it, but that sort of book I enjoy. But those 2 books, Bounce and The Chimp Paradox, are very good books.
Is it Bounce? Is not the one with the table tennis player, is it?
Yeah, Matthew Syed.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think I briefly scanned over
It's
that.
been out there some time, but if you haven't read it, then you'd enjoy it. Yeah.
And what's sort of like if someone could spend $100 on an item and they get really good value out of that?
Well, I thought about that because I know you mentioned that last time we spoke, and that's a bit of a tricky one with me because I wouldn't give anyone, you need to get this piece of equipment, it'll help you, because some people it may, and other people, it may not. So what I would suggest is you invest in a decent app for your game to give you information. And some of them, they don't have to put in hours and hours of content, but you just, write up each time you play, write up a little bit about your game. And I've mentioned those already. And I think...
Is that the software, the data ones?
Yeah,
okay.
The software, Golf Shot or Golf Data Lab or that kind of, there's a few out there, but they're good. If it's $100, I would say, if you want to improve your game, get a coach that can help you and do a little bit of work behind the scenes to find out if it's recommended or a certain coach is recommended. Maybe not near you, because a lot of people travel a lot of distance to come to me. As I know, they would go to other coaches around the country and sometimes abroad. So it's worth investing in that to get really good information. And you don't need loads of lessons. So if you're having a lesson or you've been asked to have a lesson once a week, to me that can't be right. Once a month is normally plenty. And
final question: I know you have sort of like an action challenge or something which our listeners can really take action on, sort of the lessons that we've talked about today, and sort of validate for themselves at home.
Yeah, sure. Well, again, I'd go back to the 4 stations. 1 is no target. Practice just purely on what you're improving without pressure. 2 is target, but, maybe different distances and different flights, different clubs. So you can start building it, if you're working on your driving, you can work on maybe cuts or fades or whatever it is eventually. And it could be eventually as well. It may take some time. 3, then target. So you put yourself under pressure. And then 4, go to a target, but let it be consequences. So do it under pressure, whether you're betting with a friend or whatever, or you're playing for a beer, or you're just putting it down on a card and you're recording it or putting it on your website or something, or Facebook that, you're going to commit to. Then you'll see what you're like going from no pressure into typically on-course pressure situation. So that's what I would recommend. I
think that's a fantastic way to end. And I will put all of these sort of gems and everything in the show notes on the website.
Great.
Gary, thank you so much for your time. So if anyone can reach out to you or find you, where are you, anywhere online? Yeah, GarySmithGolf.com is my website. So you can get me via that. And I've got DVDs and apps that talk about short game. One's Gary's Golf Monthly, Gary Smith Short Game. It's been out there for some time, but people love it. And it's also, I've got one called Gary Smith Long Game. So, perhaps check those out and see if they work for you. But the website, you can definitely contact me via that. Fantastic. Are you working at a specific club as well? Or? I'm most of my time when I'm over here in the UK, I'm at Sutton Green, which is between Woking and Guildford in Surrey. Sutton Green Golf Club. Well, I couldn't recommend you highly enough to anyone. So I can still hear your voice and your lessons still reciting through me now, and it's I count those days as truly memorable, and they're really fantastic. And well, great to hear that. That's any coach, that's a thrill and a privilege. No, well, thank you very much for your time today, Gary, and wish you all the best. And hopefully, I'll see you soon. Chris, it's a pleasure. I've enjoyed it. Okay, thanks a lot. Take care, Gary. Bye-bye. And you. Bye. Thanks again for listening to Making a Club Champion podcast. If you love the show, don't forget to leave a review. If you want to take immediate action on what you just learned, head over to www.makingaclubchampion.com, where you'll receive your own personal action challenges from the latest guests, all of the show notes, strategic philosophies, and much, much more. If you want even more from the show, head over to Instagram at makingaclubchampion, where you'll receive lots of golden nuggets and gems and goodies. Until next time, thanks for listening.